Oh, this is gonna be a real fun one.
What's up? It's Sadzilla with Zilla Mode, and today I'm going to be talking about something a little bit controversial, so let's get into it. One of my friends on Facebook, who's another artist, posted something kind of controversial that, of course, on Facebook, it created a heated debate, and I thought it was really interesting. I really wanted to dive into the different nuances between, the different arguments, and really dive into the details. What really is the meat of this argument? And this is the post, basically. Basically said, if your monthly listeners on Spotify don't translate to people coming to shows, then you're not famous, and it just means that Spotify is, pushing you in their playlist or whatever, right? And so that's really what I want to talk about today. I think that's a really fascinating post to talk about because it creates a lot of discussion about a lot of different things, shows and monthly listeners and like your online brand and your, local brand and like, how important is either one of these things and how different are either one of these things. So I want to talk about a lot of different elements when it comes to this discussion, and what I want to start off with is, are monthly listeners actually fans? Well, yes and no. So some of your monthly listeners are fans. They are fans that keep on coming back. They're putting you into their playlist. Maybe you're number one in their playlist. They're always checking out all of your releases that you're dropping in Release Radar, and maybe they're following you on Instagram and other social media platforms, and they're completely into whatever you're doing, right? Those are monthly listeners. But a lot of other monthly listeners are people that you just happen to show up on their radio. You happen to show up in their autoplay. You happen to show up, let's say if you're on discovery mode, which we've been talking about a lot on the channel, you show up that way. So there's a lot of different elements to, what is a monthly listener. And I mean, it literally can just mean that, a person has listened to your track one track out of on the radio or whatever, right? And so this also gives you a huge variety on where these streams and monthly listeners actually come from, and most likely they're not down the street. Now another element is, do stream/monthly listeners make you famous? Well, no and yes, again. And really this has to do with your brand. So for example, if you can pull heads at a show, for example, right? You can pull 100 people to a show in another state. That's awesome. That's great. But if you can ask 100 people, who is this artist that did that, that only has maybe 500, let's say you have 500 monthly listeners, and they ask you, who's that artist? Odds are, out of those 100 people, they're not going to know who that artist is. If you asked a random amount of people in the United States or whatever, right? They're not going to know. But when it comes to somebody that does have 1 million monthly listeners, maybe they have come across them. And so maybe there's a higher chance, well, there definitely is a higher chance that they do know what that artist is. Unless, their streams are completely botted or something like that. But the amount of money and the amount of, or lack of surveillance on an account like that is just astronomical. It doesn't really ever happen. So most likely if somebody has 1 million monthly listeners, it's legit. And so when you talk about something like that, you're talking about a huge brand outreach across the entire states and beyond. So, you're talking about name recognition. That is real name recognition, and it does matter. Now, does that mean that you're famous? No, not necessarily, but you are more famous than somebody that's just, touring around and, pulling heads at shows, in different states. That's great, but it's just totally different. It's a totally different kind of brand. Because just because you can pull, multiple heads in this city, and this city, and this city, doesn't mean that you can pull heads in the north part of the United States or the south part or, different sections of the United States or in Canada or beyond internationally. But internationally and across the entire, United States, they're more likely to know somebody that has that amount of monthly listeners because obviously they're more well known overall. You can probably guess based on my first 2 points that, what is most important about this discussion is that, your online brand and, marketing yourself online and trying to build up your name and recognition overall to, a lot of people, right, is very different than trying to do shows. So just because somebody has 1 million monthly listeners does not mean that they can pull 100 heads, 200 heads, 300 heads, or, sell out venues in different cities. And that's what's funny about the argument is that, just because you have 1 million monthly listeners, you need to be pulling hundreds of people at shows in different cities. But that's really just not the case when you look at the population of the United States. The population in the United States is like 330 million people. You're just 1 million of those. And, 1 million monthly listeners sounds huge. It sounds gigantic. I mean, I would love to have 1 million monthly listeners, but even if I get to 1 million monthly listeners, it's just a small piece of what is in the entire United States. And not only that, but like for somebody that, like myself or, somebody else that can get to 1 million monthly listeners, half of those are in the United States. The other half are in Canada, in, Japan, in Germany, in Russia. Well, not Russia right now. They can't use Spotify, but you get what I'm saying. But what you're asking really is just based on, monthly listeners alone and that maybe pretty good brand and name recognition overall, it just cannot translate at the get-go hundreds of people knowing and wanting to go to these shows in the first place. Because those monthly listeners are just spread way too thin when you stretch them out over the entire United States. Now, another argument in this debate is, Spotify is just pushing your music. You're only getting these monthly listeners because Spotify is pushing your music. Once Spotify stops pushing your music, you're not going to be anywhere. And so that's why you need to focus on shows and doing stuff like that, which there might be an argument with that. I mean, honestly, if Spotify just did not exist, where would a lot of artists be? Where would they go? Obviously, there would be some kind of other platform that, probably a lot of people would go to and flock to, and you would get listeners over there. It would just transfer over. But the thing is that, the idea is that, Spotify is mainly the main factor behind what is pushing people's music. But really, I mean, that can be answered very easily because you can see what is algorithmic and what is not. So, for example, my own stuff is about 20% algorithmic. So, out of 1.5 million streams a month, only 20% of those are from algorithmic streams, meaning radio, autoplay, and stuff like that. It actually doesn't even mean editorials. Editorials could be an even lower thing. Now, there are artists that are mainly pushed algorithmically, and it's just because they don't release a lot of music or because they got some, hit song out of nowhere that just popped off. Maybe they're on Discover mode, right? And, they have a song that hits really big and, that's all they have to go off of. The idea that people are only being pushed by Spotify and, they don't have fans anywhere else is kind of null and void. It really doesn't mean anything because there are fans that listen to the same music on YouTube. It carries over to different platforms, and just because Spotify happens to be the best at pushing music to new discoverable people doesn't mean that Spotify is doing everything all the time with every big artist. In fact, most of the time, they're not doing enough. And one thing that's really interesting about Spotify is that Spotify actually lists live shows. So when we talk about live shows and, that conversion, Spotify has something built in so that you can actually promote the shows that you have going on Spotify. And I think that's a really cool feature. And it also brings me to my next point about, people who listen on Spotify aren't necessarily showgoers. I think this is an important thing to keep in context because a lot of people just don't go to shows, and especially they don't go to local shows. There's a lot of people that will go to festivals. There's a lot of people that will go to big shows at, like Post Malone or something like that, but they won't go to local shows. You may listen to my music on your playlist every single day and you're always jamming it or whatever, and you may find out that I have a show coming up, right? that doesn't guarantee that that person is going to go to my show, right? Because not everybody goes to shows. I mean, right? I mean, and also not only that, but for my genre alone, it's a very different crowd than somebody that, is in the metal music, where the local scene is a big deal. A lot of people who like listening to metal go to metal shows, and it's a totally different kind of culture. But somebody that listen to your song, or they have like one favorite song of yours and they listen to it all the time, is very different than somebody that's listening to your entire discography and they're a gigantic super fan, right? And so the odds of that are pretty slim to none. But I mean, that brings me to my next point. Are they loyal fans? Can, getting good streams and stuff like that and, pushing your online brand, can that build loyal fans? And what is the difference? What is the difference between a loyal fan that you get from, online marketing or, some loyal fan that you get from meeting in person and doing a show? Well, the thing is that they are kind of different. So, meaning that if I go to your show and I've never heard your music before and I watch you perform, I'm not guaranteed to go listen to your music after the show. It just doesn't work like that. I can name out so many shows. Well, I can't really name out so many shows, but I mean, I can think of all the times I went to shows in metal scene or in rap shows and I never checked out their music afterwards. And this was when I wasn't even an artist necessarily. I never had the desire to listen to somebody's music. And these, even like bigger bands I've gone and seen and I haven't checked out their music. Now, most of the time, the bands that I go to see are bands that I already know. Let's say a friend showed them to me, or I got recommended them by, in the store or something like that, next to another CD of a band that I like, right? Or a rap artist that I like. Or let's say I discovered them on Spotify, right? This is how most music is discovered. This is how most people find music, and this is how most people listen to music. They do not go to shows to find new music. It's just not how it works. It just brings me back to my point. Yet shows and online presence is just completely different, and there are benefits and negative things about both things. Now let's talk about those big artists that can't pull heads, right? So let's say you have 250,000 monthly listeners like myself, or a million monthly listeners, and you want to pull heads at a show. One thing that I think a lot of people are leaving out of context in these discussions are about show promoters. So yes, you can have a million monthly listeners, or you can have like me, 250,000, right? And that seems like a big amount of people that should be able to come to your show, right? But if the show promoter doesn't do their job, then it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because you can't be in that local scene. Like, let's say you're playing out of state, you can't be there to promote. So the show promoter has to put out ads. They have to put out flyers. They have to get locals on the show, which is a huge part. Even you have to pull locals. You cannot just go to another state and not have locals playing at the show and expect for people to show up. It's just not how it works. You have to have that local support built in. And that goes for, even somebody with a million monthly listeners. They need that local support always. So it really doesn't matter as much as people think it does. Like, oh, you have a million monthly listeners or something like that, you should already have people going. No, it just doesn't work like that. You have to have that local support. Pulling people to your shows in these other states or locally has more to do with you being a good booker, making connections locally in those places, and being a familiar performer. In a lot of ways, you need to create a local brand. You need to create a reputation in all these places. You don't always pull people to these shows at the first time, right? You have to come back. And the more you come back, the more people are going to show up. And that's why tour experience is so important. I mean, if you do not tour, you are not going to get the experience to know who the bookers are that you need to be contacting, like who are the venues that you need to be contacting, who are the locals you need to be contacting. If you do not know that stuff, you're not going to pull people. It has everything to do with being a show promoter and a booker more than it has to do with, you having a bunch of monthly listeners. And I used to be a show promoter. I promoted shows for over 10 years of my life in my 20s. And I know about show promoting. I know how, the ins and outs when it comes to, booking shows and, talking to, touring acts and, door deals and guarantees. I know all that stuff. I know all that stuff like the back of my hand, but taking my brand and going out there and doing it, it's going to take a total new amount of work, a total new amount of grind that me personally, I'm not that interested in. We've talked about this before, why I don't do a bunch of shows right now. And the reason is because I focus on my online brand. In a lot of ways, shows are just sales. When you do a show out of state, you got to talk to everybody. You got to talk to the show promoters. You got to talk to other show promoters. You got to talk to, the people that watch you, the locals. You got to talk to everybody. You have to make connections. You have to also sell people on your merchandise. You have to sell people on your performance itself. It's all about selling a product, and that product, hopefully they come back for when you come back. Shows at a lower popularity level, let's say you don't have any monthly listeners and you're going straight off of just your performance alone. It has way more to do with your performance and the way that you engage those people than people knowing about your songs. Meaning that nobody is going to those shows because they know your songs. They're going to those shows because they know you. You've made an impact in their lives personally. You have talked to them personally. They are friends almost of yours, right? They're going to come back to your shows because they know you. They don't have to know your music. They know you. They know that your performance is going to be good. Now, whether they listen to your music when they leave, that's another thing. But regardless, they are there for you and you alone. Now, okay, after all that, you guys debate in the comments and everything. I really hope to get your opinions on this. I think it's a fascinating discussion and debate. I want to debate with you guys. I think it's really fun. So go ahead and lay down in the comments. Tell me what your thoughts are on all this. Most likely, if you're watching my videos, you're focused more on the online aspect. So maybe there's not too much, dissension there, but regardless, let me know your thoughts on this. I have one more thought that I want to just throw in here before we wrap this up, and that is about what is the money maker? What does it take to tour versus what does it take to build an online brand? Now, you have to invest money into your online brand. You have to invest money into promotion online. This is very true. And it could be a lot of money and it could be, just a little bit here, a little bit there. But when it comes to touring, you got to do a lot of things up front and you're probably not going to come back with a lot of money. Usually with online stuff, you can get a lot of it back. If you build something like myself, I'm paid every single month. I am stable. I take care of my family and am very grateful for what I have. But if I go tour, I'm spending a lot of money up front. I'm getting money when I, get guarantees or door deals or whatever the case may be. But all that money goes towards gas, goes towards food, goes towards living costs, lodging, unless I'm sleeping on a couch somewhere, right? So there's not a lot of money to be made on tour. So really, what are you doing it for? You're doing it to convert fans. And how much is that really converting? Honestly, these days, it's just very different than it used to be. It's not really about converting at this point. Right now, it's about creating reputation so that you can do bigger shows. Honestly, things like festivals and stuff like that are, going to be more beneficial overall than doing, small shows here and there and these, smaller tours, because they just don't convert like you would hope they would. Or at least not like they used to. Anyway, that's enough of that. I'm done talking about this. This was a really fun video to do, and I really, like I said, I hope to get y'all's thoughts. Hopefully it's not too heated down there in the comment section. But overall, Hope you guys got value out of this. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun with it. Anyway, until next time, I've been Sadzilla. You just went into Zilla mode. Zilla out. Oh, also, hey, if you could just click like and subscribe down below, and click the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I drop videos like this. That would be, just absolutely fantastic. I would love you forever. Anyway, peace.